Hey everybody, this is Darren Van Dam and you are watching Flick Connection, the show that helps you get more out of movies, and today I want to tell you about 25 hidden gem horror movies you can currently watch on Amazon Prime. Now there are a ton of really good horror movies on Prime right now. There's some classics like Rosemary's Baby, Silence of the Lambs, Night of the Living Dead, An American Werewolf in London, and new classics like Hereditary. Really top shelf stuff. I'm not covering those in this video because they kind of rise to the top. Instead, I'm recommending some hidden gems, some horror movies that I really love that I think a lot of you have probably missed. And with a list of 25, there's bound to be at least a handful that you have not seen that'll be great to watch for Halloween this year. I'd like to thank the sponsor, CyberGhost VPN, for sponsoring another video. You guys have been having a great response to this service, the ones of you that have signed up. Later on in the video, I'm going to tell you how you can get more out of your Netflix and other streaming service subscriptions with this service. But we're going to start this list off with one that's got a pretty strong cult following from Australia called Lake Mungo. Now, I feel like I need to give you a spoiler because if I mislead you on this one, you're going to be pissed at me when the movie's over. But this is a documentary style movie that feels very real. It's about a girl that goes missing and then there's supernatural elements. And while it's not a real life documentary, it feels very real. So if you allow yourself to get into it and sort of, again, suspend the disbelief and just sort of go with it, this one's really pretty frightening, yet it's subtle. That's why it's all the way back at 25. It's really well done, but it's super subtle, and I can see why for some people it's not gonna be enough of a scare for you, whereas others are gonna absolutely love this movie and think that it should be ranked way higher.
You're the chosen ones.
Just give us whatever pamphlets you got and get out of here.
Yeah. There is a man roaming this city, killing anyone he can, and he's collecting their souls.
Dude, are you cracked?
Probably the biggest hidden gem that I know the most amount of you watching have not seen, have not heard of, know nothing about is Butcher the Bakers. This is beyond a low budget movie. This is a homemade movie almost, and it's got a really great sense of humor. So this is a horror comedy, but it's a little bit of a gore fest. It's not overly gory, but there's crazy monsters. This is kind of like a Clive Barker thing, but with this really odd, quirky sense of humor that I found to be really funny. Now, it's important to keep in mind the extreme low budget of this, because it definitely feels like it, but when you know that they're making this with close to nothing, it's really impressive and it's a really fun watch. I enjoyed this one. If you find that you enjoy movies like that are done on almost no budget, Butcher the Bakers is an absolute gem.
If I were a religious human being and not the reasoning person I think I am, I wouldn't say this thing thinks it's Satan. I'd say it is Satan.
Well, Satan is a deep shit.
All right, and then we'll jump to kind of a big budget movie with Rutger Hauer called Split Second. Now this one kind of just squeaks into the horror genre, but it takes place in this future. It's in England and there's a lot of flooding. Not crazy flooding, like the Jeeps and stuff driving around are just always in like 6 inches of water, but it's this kind of dystopian future, and there's these murders that are happening that may or may not have a supernatural element. Rutger Hauer, who just died this past year, is really great in it as the lead, and there's some really good practical special effects in this one. It's kind of a fun gem that I think had a little bit of an audience back when it came out, but it sort of has like disappeared into obscurity. Something to keep in mind with these Amazon Prime recommendations is when you search for it, they often are listed twice, sometimes for paid and free. All of these, as of me recording this and posting it, are available on Amazon Prime in the US and mostly in other countries as far as I can tell. My next pick is called The Dead, and this is your kind of run-of-the-mill zombie movie, but this actually takes place in Africa, and it's sort of this adventure story. You're following the main character as he goes through these villages and things. The thing that makes this one special is the setting. It's just a different place to have this zombie apocalypse take place, and it plays out pretty well. It is another low budget movie, certainly a much bigger budget than Butcher the Bakers. There's a lot of special effects in this one, but again, smaller story, you're focused kind of on one character, and I was really excited to see this one for so long. I had a really hard time getting my hands on a copy, a Blu-ray copy, and then when I finally did, I watched it, I really enjoyed it. It just so happens I actually caught this one on Prime right before recording and figured out just where to place it in this list, and I booted something else out just to get it on the list. Triangle is one I've mentioned before. This one takes place in the Bermuda Triangle. It's got a group of people that discover a lost ship, like let's call it a ghost ship. Not quite a ghost haunted house thing, even though it does have that vibe. This is kind of a mind bender of a movie, and it's pretty well done. You're dealing with time paradoxes and things like that. It gets to be kind of violent, and there's a killer, and it's pretty layered. This is kind of a surprising one if you've never seen it. It's a really fun watch. I highly recommend it. The only reason it doesn't get any higher on the list is because this is one of the best Amazon lists I've put together in a while. I love everything else coming on here. This one was a little bit on the mediocre side if I'm sitting on the fence, but it's a strong recommendation from me. It's been on Flicks of the Week in the past. All right, another low budget one. I recommended it on Netflix, and as soon as that video went up, like within days, Residue was removed from Netflix and everybody was pissed at me. This is a fun movie, but again, super low budget, but the creators had so much fun with this movie. You can tell when you're watching it. It has kind of an H.P. Lovecraft vibe. This is not based on Lovecraft's work, but if you like stuff that's based on H.P. Lovecraft, you're gonna like this movie. If you like B horror movies, if you watch stuff like Mystery Science Theater or things that Joe Bob Briggs does, you're gonna like this movie. There's a lot to really enjoy, again, because the creators had so much fun with it. And then again, you get great practical effects. They're a little bit sparse, something that would just kill at a horror film festival, and not a super scary one either, but you do have to have a love for sort of like B-level horror movies to really get this one. All right, Trilogy of Terror is a classic, but it's a classic that I feel like only die-hard horror fans know about. This is an anthology flick, and they're all good. As with all anthology flicks, some are better than others, but there's one that is fairly famous. You may have seen like this little doll with sharp teeth before. That's probably the one that's the most famous, and this one can be a little bit silly at times. I'm underplaying it. It is really silly at times, and then pretty scary at other times. It's really creative and clever and doesn't feel like anything else. So for like a 70s, I want to say late 70s, early 80s, anthology setup that can be pretty scary if you get into it, Trilogy of Terror is a great one. Okay, recently on my review of In the Shadow of the Moon, the new Netflix original movie, I talked about all of the director's other movies, including one of his first called Mulberry St. And Mulberry St. is available on Amazon Prime right now. So this one's hard to explain, but think 28 Days Later on a micro budget, but instead of zombies, there are rat mutants. That's all I want to say. That's a lot. That gives away a big part of it. But if you've never seen it, I gotta sell you on it because I do want you to watch it. Again, B-level horror, and there are some bigger budget movies on this list, but B-level horror, that's kind of why it is continued to be a hidden gem. But it's really well executed. I mean, the guy went on to do some other movies, including another one that I like even more that is way near the top of this list. But Mulberry St. is pretty good, and another one took me a really long time to get my hands on a copy, and now you can just watch it on Amazon Prime. Lucky you. Okay, so now we hit the first one that is a pretty serious movie that not everyone's gonna love. Last week on my Netflix list, The Witch topped my scariest movies on Netflix. This one's in the vein of The Witch, just in the sense that if you like The Witch, you're probably gonna like Goodnight Mommy. If you hated The Witch, I would not recommend that you watch Goodnight Mommy. They're very different movies, but they have this very slow, creepy pace to them. And in this one, you follow a couple of twin boys whose mother has apparently recently had like major facial surgery. And there's just, as you can see, there's creepy, creepy imagery. There's weird stuff with the twins, and this one just continues to get weirder and weirder and creepier and creepier, and ultimately just like really can give you the willies if you're paying attention. The slow pace kind of makes it easy for you to lose interest in this one, but it is really well done.
What is that? It's everything. Sarah, have you watched those? No. So you have no idea what's on them?
Hell House.
Another crowd favorite, one that everybody loved last year when I recommended it, is House LLC. I just got to get the word out to more people. If you haven't seen this one, it's a really good found footage movie. And I don't like recommending found footage movies often because they're often so kind of tired and the same. This one felt fresh to me, even though it's not doing anything that crazy. In this one, you follow a group of people who are setting up a haunted house for Halloween. They're decorating it, setting up the special effects, and weird things start to happen in this creepy old house that they've rented for this haunted house event. And the movie opens up with some horrific event that happens on opening night of the haunted house. You don't really know what it is. And then the movie goes back and kind of retraces steps. And it is a good haunted house horror flick, just told from the vantage point of this found footage thing that I thought worked really well. There's some really fun gags in it. And because it's in a haunted house full of all kinds of creepy stuff, there's like an added scare factor. Hostile, not to be confused with Hostel, the Eli Roth movie, is a fairly recent release that I liked. This one is a very different post-apocalyptic movie. You follow one main character who's in a vehicle accident, sort of in the beginning of the movie, and they're trapped out in this post-apocalyptic wasteland where there are these human-eating creatures. So think kind of like the movie Pitch Black. It's like a very distant relative to this one. But then you also have these series of flashbacks that occur before this apocalyptic event that sort of make it a more human story, sort of like this tragic love story, I guess I could say. But then you get these really great horror elements that are fairly simple, but they're shot really well. They look really good. This one does not look like a super low budget movie. It's really well put together. It's got some good scares in it. And for something that's a fairly recent release, this one remains to be that kind of hidden gem level that I think more people are going to discover over the coming years. All right, one of the, just as far as B movies go, this one sort of tops the list. That's why I've kind of got it here in the middle as we get better and better. But Hatchet II is done by Adam Green, who's done a series of movies, including a series of Hatchet movies. I'm partial to Hatchet II. It's one of the most self-aware B-level slasher flicks I've ever seen. This is one that will appeal to people who love the slasher genre. Odds are some of you that really are into it know and love this movie already. If you love movies like Friday the 13th, you are going to like this one. Again, super self-aware to the point that it's got a bunch of cast members from other horror movies in it. The kills in it are clever and creative where you think you know what's gonna happen because you've seen so many horror movies and then something different happens. Good, gory, practical effects, and it's just a lot of fun. This is a gore fest. This is a lot of high body count, a lot of kills, a lot of gags, jokes, and it all manages to work together just like perfectly, in my opinion. So if you want a fun one that's just a great like slasher romp, Hatchet 2 is gonna be your best bet on Amazon Prime right now. All right, now another one that's gory, but on the far other side of the spectrum is Anonymous 616. Now this one I do not recommend to everybody. I have it placed where I want on the list, but it's not for anyone that's super sensitive. This is, I've said it before, possibly the most adult movie I've ever seen. Certainly one of them. It's maybe in the top 10, so maybe it's in the top 10 as far as the most adult movies I've ever seen, but it is rough. And friend of the show, Daniel DeWeldon, stars in it as the, I guess we'll call him a villain. If you went nuts for Joker this past week, Daniel DeWeldon plays an amazing bad guy in this movie. It is a very, very low budget movie to the point that it feels kind of like a stage production. It all takes place, almost all takes place in this living room, certainly all takes place in one house. And it's about a group of friends that are having a dinner party. They take some psychedelic drugs, and Daniel's character, who suffers from PTSD, begins to communicate with something over the internet that is manipulating him and maybe convincing him to do some wicked things. And a little inside track on this one, after watching it, I reached out, was able to contact the actor, Daniel. He and I have become friends. He's been on the show a couple of times. I did some behind the scenes work on one of his upcoming movies, Weekend Warriors. I think he's getting ready to break. He's gonna be somebody I think you're gonna see more of in the future.
Here comes our cue! Here it comes.
And then another one that has friends of the show in it is I Had a Bloody Good Time at House Harker. This is just a really fun gem that I discovered a couple of years ago on Prime. They're this comedy group that wrote this really great script about this vampire party, basically. And the really fun gag on this one is when you stab the vampires, they pop. And there's this house full of people that get turned into vampires. It's a really fun movie. And even the parts that are not full of action and vampire slaying are just fun. The characters are really great. So again, be on the lookout for some of those. In fact, if you really want to watch this one with me, I watched this one with one of the creators and stars, Derek Hagen. So we live streamed it. You can go back and watch that one. We set up a timer. You cue it up on your TV, you cue us up on your phone or your computer, and we signal you when to hit play. And he gives a lot of backstory and commentary as we go through, but it's kind of like hanging out and watching the movie with us. So check that out. There's a link to that video in the description.
How dare you destroy my photographer? Why not the script girl?
I'll eat her later.
And then before we get to the top 10, Shadow of the Vampire is a really great movie about the making of Nosferatu. Yet it supposes that the vampire in Nosferatu is real, and he's played by Willem Dafoe. Really great practical effects and makeup. Willem Dafoe looks great in it. This is a comedy, but it's not like overly silly and comedic. It's actually just a really good movie for movie lovers because it's about the making of a movie, like an early silent era movie. So that part's fun. Val Kilmer's got a great role in it, and John Malkovich has got a great role in it. And then it's got these really just sort of fun, quirky elements to it. I've liked this one for years, and it only just became available on Prime recently. I mentioned at the top of the video that CyberGhost VPN allows you to access more movies with your current subscriptions. There's a link in the description where you can get CyberGhost for as little as $2.75 a month. And right now in the UK using CyberGhost, I found horror movies on Netflix like Misery, Shaun of the Dead, Mama, Happy Death Day. You can use it up to 7 devices at one time. You can use it on Apple, Android, Linux, Windows, Fire Stick. They have a 45-day money-back guarantee. So they got great 24/7 customer support. And it also blocks malicious websites, and it makes your web browsing more secure. I personally do use them, and I recommend it. So if you want to check out that link, I know some of you have been doing it already, and you give me some good responses in the comments. All right, top 10 on this list begins with Midnight Meat Train. Now, I just love the title of this one alone. When I watched it, I had zero expectations for it, and I was pleasantly surprised, and I happened to see this right before Bradley Cooper broke. So Bradley Cooper kind of joins that long list of really famous actors who have been in like one horror movie. People like Johnny Depp and Brad Pitt, they've all done one horror movie. Bradley Cooper's in this one, and so is Vinnie Jones. He's got a really great creepy role as the killer. And this is about a killer on the subway, and Bradley Cooper is a photographer who begins to investigate. And this one just went into this really weird direction that I was not expecting, and I thought it was great. It's got a great creepy vibe. Not my favorite Halloween movie, but as far as like a hidden gem, classifying it as a hidden gem, if you haven't seen it, you're gonna be pleasantly surprised by this one like I was. Another just pleasantly surprising one that I have recommended on Flicks of the Week is Afflicted. This one's another found footage one, but with an even better twist than Hell House, which is why I have it ranked higher. This is a couple of guys doing like a backpacking tour across Europe that are vlogging the whole thing. They come across something they probably shouldn't have come across. One of them begins to get what might be an infection, and then begins to exhibit what appear to be superhuman abilities, and they're chronicling all of this on film, and it makes for some really great elements. The reason I think this story is so great for the found footage angle is it makes the stuff look super real, and this one did a great job of ratcheting up as it went. It just gets wilder and wilder rather than just sort of like staying down middle of the road. It just keeps getting better and better, which is why I really enjoyed it.
It's piss.
All right, another horror comedy, and the wildest horror comedy on this list, for obvious reasons, is Deathgasm.
Deathgasm.
Now this one's about some metalheads that find this sheet music, and when they play it, it awakens this plague of demons. And now you've got kind of this Shaun of the Dead element. You've got this young sort of like inside his shell character that has to break out of that shell and then fight off demons and save the girl and the whole thing. But this one's got a dildo fight, it's got a bunch of severed heads, blood, metal, lightning. It's as wild as it sounds, and it's a ton of fun, a great Halloween watch if you haven't seen it. So Amazon Prime has a show called Absentia. I have not seen it, but there's a movie by the same title that's actually directed by the same guy who did The Haunting of Hill House. He just did the new Doctor Sleep, the follow-up to The Shining. He did Hush, which was on my Netflix list. I really like his directing style in terms of horror, and Absentia is his first film that just killed it in the festival circuit, and it got all sorts of buzz, and with minimal, without doing a lot in terms of special effects and horror elements, he achieved this really great horror flick that's like a distant relative to the Billy Goat's Gruff. There's this tunnel and people go jogging and some people don't come back. But as far as one done on a micro budget that achieves a lot with very little, this one did better in that respect, in my opinion, than Paranormal Activity did. And don't expect the big crazy crescendo of special effects that horror movies all love to do nowadays. I think it's kind of a waste. I don't think it works generally in horror movies. I think it really takes me out of them. And this one avoids that completely, mainly because they couldn't afford to, but also because it's the smart thing to do.
I didn't believe in the boogeyman. Then the world woke up to a nightmare.
Welcome to Steak Land, kid.
All right, and I told you the director of Mulberry St had another one way up this list. Here he is in the top 10 again with Steak Land. Now, I recommended this when it was on Netflix. It has since left. It moved to Amazon Prime. That happens a lot. That's why I think it's good to have both if you can afford to do so. But Steak Land is another post-apocalyptic story, except instead of zombies, they're vampires. Now, they are kind of like zombified vampires. Think kind of like Blade 2. They just have to feed. So it's almost like a zombie apocalypse movie, except they're feeding on your blood and they're a little more vicious. The survivors are walking around with, bandoliers full of steaks and stuff, and it's desolate and there's abandoned cars. It looks like sets from The Walking Dead or something, and then you get these crazy vampires. They did such a good job that there is a Steak Land 2. However, I do not recommend Steak Land 2. It felt kind of like a sci-fi original series or something, like not nearly as good as the first, and really should probably be skipped.
Guys need any help? Do you need some help, or can you do it yourself?
Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, was a game changer when it came out. Again, I'll invoke Joker since that's in the news right now. Everyone's talking about Joker. Henry goes way further than Joker went, and it did it 30 plus years before Joker did it. Not hating on Joker, but it's been done before. And Henry, you follow a serial killer. You see what he's doing, why he's making the decisions he's making. This one is grim. Just like I mentioned with Anonymous 616, do not watch this one if you're sensitive to horrible things happening to people. It seems like that goes without saying with horror movies, but it's not really the case. Like Deathgasm is a ton of fun. They're killing demons and stuff. This one, horrible stuff is happening to seemingly good people. It's not just terrifying, it's super chilling and it's gonna make you feel gross, but it's really well executed and really respectfully executed as well in terms of just feeling real. If you haven't seen it, it kind of begs to be watched. Just make sure you do it when you're in the right mood, because it can be a mood killer. All right, so easily the weirdest one on this list, and possibly the worst in terms of cinema, like the worst reviewed one on this list would be The Evil Within. However, this one is so interesting to me. It was created by an independently wealthy guy, and he was addicted to meth the entire time he was doing it, and he died before the movie came out. People that were working on it with him finished it, and it took years to make because they kept having to stop because weird stuff kept happening. Cast members dying or getting severely injured, and it kept interrupting the production, and they kept somehow managing to resume it. Now, if that's not crazy enough, it's got wild practical effects, and it's done again by this meth addict millionaire who knew nothing about practical effects. It makes for wild visuals, it's a wild backstory, it's a crazy story in the movie itself. It's about this handicapped adult that's a younger brother of a guy that has some sort of evil entity talking to him, convincing him to do, again, awful things. Super weird movie. It goes in the wildest direction. I highly recommend it for anyone who likes the way I'm talking about it, who wants to watch something just weird and crazy and dark. If you don't want to do that, you just want to watch something fun, stay away from the evil within. Although, this one does manage to be kind of fun at times as well, in its own super weird way.
I've discreetly nailed them all shut.
Don't they just smash them out?
You'd think so, but you'd be surprised. No.
A fun one that I think almost anybody can watch, there is some gore in it, but I mean, it's a horror movie, is Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. So kind of think like Henry, the Portrait of a Serial Killer. It's even got a similar title, except this one's like fun. Kind of like Hatchet II, it takes all the tropes of a slasher flick and just has fun with him. And with this one, it's also found footage. You're following some film students that are making a documentary about a quote-unquote serial killer, and he's preparing for like this massacre he's gonna do on Halloween night, or it may have been a full moon or something, but the whole time they keep questioning, like, is this for real? Is this guy joking? Is he crazy? I'm not gonna spoil it, but I was questioning it the whole time as well, and it delivers on promises made, and it does a great job. Robert Englund has a really cool role. If he looks familiar, he's Freddy Krueger. So again, another one that's super self-aware and fun to watch. I could recommend this one to almost anybody. It's a really, really great gem that does have its cult following. Clive Barker's Nightbreed is one of my favorites on the list. It's at number 2, and if the name Clive Barker sounds familiar, he's most famous for Hellraiser. But Nightbreed has this epic scope. It's got fantasy elements, horror elements, the special effects, the makeup, the story's epic. Think sort of like Never-Ending Story in the horror genre. I can't believe it wasn't more successful and they didn't do more with it, but that's what makes it perfect for this list. If you've never heard of it or you've never seen it, this is one of those like 80s classics that just deserves more respect and deserves more eyeballs. And then one that definitely deserves more eyeballs. I'm proud to put this one at number, I don't know why I'm proud, but I'm happy to put this one at number 1. And just hang with me, let me explain. The Exorcist III. Now, The Exorcist, I think, is one of the greatest horror movies ever made, but The Exorcist III is super underappreciated. Now, in this movie, George C. Scott, who most of you know as Patton, plays a detective, and he's investigating these odd murders, like someone in a hospital bed is dead and all the blood is drained from their body, and not only is it not in their body, it's in a bunch of little cups next to the bed, and there's not a drop spilled. So what you get with this movie is kind of something a little bit like Seven. It's not as dark and brooding as Seven, yet you get this sort of murder mystery thing that then has supernatural elements because it is The Exorcist. It's actually directed by the same guy who wrote The Exorcist, and then there wasn't even going to be an exorcism sequence in it, and they're like, nope, it's called The Exorcist III, we gotta put an exorcism sequence in it. I feel like it doesn't ruin the movie, but it also didn't really need it. That said, total hidden gem. If you haven't seen it, definitely watch it. If you like this type of content, please click the subscribe button and take a minute to thank the Patreon supporters in the comments below. Here are their names. There's some new ones. The list is growing. If you'd like to become one, just follow the link in the description and see if you like the benefits and if it's a good fit for you. But I will keep making these videos as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for checking out my final horror list for this holiday season, but you will see me on the next video.